Hello? Hello? Is that it? Okay. Good evening. Thank you all for being here with us tonight at this Civil Rights Conference. Tonight we are going to hear from the Roots of Rhythm, but before we get started, I wanted to just direct your attention to the poster exhibit outside. You may have noticed when you came in we had a display of posters. This is from a project from the U.S. Government and Civics course taught by Kyle Carrasco at the STEM School Chattanooga. It was in collaboration with his colleague Rose Denor and the Global Center of Design and Innovation. And the purpose of the project was to encourage students to evaluate the impact of hidden figures upon civil rights history. So if you go out and look at those posters, you'll notice that there's a code on each one you can scan and see the work the students did on the background of those figures. The students identified hidden figures within the various civil rights movements and traced their impact on amending the Constitution, passing legislation, and evaluating Supreme Court cases. And then all of these posters were created to commemorate their historical contributions. So I wanted to recognize Mr. Carrasco and his students for contributing those posters to display tonight and throughout our conference. I also want to mention, if you're a student here and you'd like extra credit for attending tonight, please stop by the doors to see me to sign in so I can make sure that your professors have note of your attendance. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Henry Giles for our introduction.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Alicia. Alicia is one of the members of our planning committee, the Civil Rights Conference Planning Committee, and I see one other member, Dr. Danny Pirtle. I hope I'm not missing anyone else. But thank you all for coming out. Just a quick run through of some of the upcoming events. Tomorrow night, we will have a night of dance, a celebration of African American dance presented by the UTM Visual and Theater Arts. So that is tomorrow night at 7, same place. Friday night, we will welcome Jared Benjamin, who will talk to us about many of the issues surrounding cancel culture. That's a very interesting topic these days for any one of us who are on social media, and I know that affects all of our students. You have seen what can happen with cancel culture. So Jared Benjamin will be here Friday, here in Watkins at 6. Next week, we will welcome social activist Tamika Mallory and sports journalist Jamel Hill. So those events will take place on Tuesday. Tamika Mallory will be here on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Jamel Hill. For any of you sports enthusiasts, she used to work at ESPN, so she will be joining us. Tonight, the UTM Civil Rights Conference welcomes Roots of Rhythm, music of the African diaspora. Tonight's performance is presented by Brady Spitz and students in our very own Department of Music. And we are so happy that you all are here to bring this to us. And thank you all for coming. So let's welcome Mr. Spitz and his students.
We're going to do it, and we're going to parade up the center aisle and out into the lobby for us to start So as close as you can come, that would be amazing. We would really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so while they're finishing setting up, I'll sort of go through some of the stuff that we talk about. We talk about, even with young children, we try and integrate ourselves into their social studies curriculum and talk about the African diaspora and the act of colonization. So we go through and talk about the slave trade, specifically the triangular trade route, because you can actually look at how culture moves across the Atlantic Ocean by understanding that. So if you need a quick refresher, the triangle slave trade route, people start from Europe, they find funders, take ships to Africa, capture and enslave people, and then bring that unpaid labor to the Americas. Now that comes to all places. We talk about, the history of slavery and the elements of racism that have existed and still exist in this country, but that exists in the entire Western Hemisphere to some degree. So a lot of the music that we're going to talk about comes from South America. We really don't talk much about North American music, but of course there are elements of that. We talk about the Caribbean in a few different places. But these slaves were brought to produce or provide unpaid labor to get raw materials and ship those raw materials back to Europe, where they were then turned around into processed goods, which made more money and made more slave trade. And that lasted until the 1830s, basically. And then, of course, we saw the this, just so you're all aware what happened. We came in and we were like, oh, there's no way that dancing's happening up on that stage. So we're going to skip through this part of the presentation. But, we'll talk about this stuff even with elementary school children, talk about sort of the history of colonization and the history of independence in some of these countries. Some of their musical stuff, we of course saw Fume Fume, which was the drumming piece, the Gilles, and then the Bewa medley, which is what we just played. The next place we're going is Cuba. Cuba has, I don't want to say the most sort of culturally developed, but it's certainly the most culturally exported element of essentially it's sort of a hybridized culture of Spanish and African elements. And a common story throughout all the places that were colonized in the New World were that there were people from disparate African cultures shoved into locations where sometimes they didn't even speak the same language, they didn't have the same religious practices, and a lot of times they were also forced to become Christian in some variety, usually Catholic, but not always. And then they developed their own cultural and religious practices based out of that. And so in Cuba, we have a Spanish-speaking country that really didn't escape European colonialism until almost 1900. It was freed from Spain in the Spanish-American War, but it was essentially a protectorate of the United States until 1902. And of course, until the Cuban embargo in the 1961, 1962, I don't remember. It was a favored vacation spot for Americans, right? We're going to talk more about folkloric Afro-Cuban music, which is a representation of some of the religious worship traditions in what we know as Santeria. So we're going to be playing bata drums. You guys want to hold up a bata?
Yeah.
These are 3 different sized drums, and each hand that they're playing, like everybody's left hand will have a conversation, and everyone's right hand will have a conversation. So there's interlocking patterns on these drums. We have shakeres. We have a frying pan part that's playing the bell pattern, which is not uncommon. Oftentimes it was a hoe blade, actually, not a frying pan. But it's playing the same kind of central backbone bell pattern. And these are elements of music that were essentially It's called syncretic music, where it's sort of filtered down through many generations, and religious and cultural traditions sort of all melt together. Santeria, we sort of think of it as voodoo, I guess, but Santeria is deity worship. The deities are called Ochosi. They're going to be singing in, what is it Yoruban? Yeah. So singing in Yoruban, we're trying to do our best to sort of honor this tradition. So this song is called Road to Elegua, and Elegua is the name of one of the Ochosis.
Hello, hello. I go, ile, I go. 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 I go, ile, I go, yeah. 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 I go, ile, I go. I go, ile, I go. I go, ile, I go.
the nation are, it's like two nations together, Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad is the place where steel drums were invented. So these drums we're gonna play in a minute were invented there. And steel drums are the only family of instruments that were invented and propagated in the 20th century. Saxophones are the second oldest. The saxophone family was invented and propagated in the mid-1800s. But this is they had to come from somewhere. And another narrative element that's common throughout all of the Americas as they dealt with their history of the ending of slavery, but then the existence of racism that pervaded these cultures after the end of slavery, was banning elements of their musical practice. So bata drums would have been banned at a certain point. We get conga drums, if you guys have seen congas before, they're very sort of pervasive Latin jazz instruments. We get congas and bongos, we get cajones. All those things descended from pickle barrels and shipping containers, which is what they played when their traditional music was banned in the countries. Like cajones were shipping crates from Puerto Rico that were banned. Congas were pickle barrels that were banned in Cuba, or that were replacements for the bata drums that were banned in Cuba. In the country of Trinidad, we get their traditional music gets essentially banned, and then they start making music with whatever they have available. And so in this case, they have big tracts of bamboo and found objects. So we get low pieces of bamboo, which in our case is actually a piece of PVC, called a boom. We get high pieces of bamboo called cutters. And then we get a variety of found objects, like the frying pan and like the glass bottle, and there's a scraper element here. And that's going to come into play because this is what they were able to make music with before they were able to make steel drums. We'll talk about steel drums in just a second. But this is a style of music called tambu bamboo, which is the precursor to steel pan music. music is important for a lot of different reasons that we can talk about, but I think one of them is this narrative in particular in Trinidad is evidence of how much culture perseveres despite obstacles, right? So there's a direct line between the instruments in tambu bamboo and then the steel drums that were invented in the middle of the 20th century. Steel drums started as basically being hammered out pieces on paint cans, and then that developed into leftover oil barrels. And actually the development of these instruments is essentially a very high evolution of World War II, because a guy named Ali Minette that just died a couple of years ago, and a couple of other people basically took the oil barrels that were left over from U.S. military ships, diesel barrels, and they cut them off and tuned them. They had only been doing that with paint cans previous to that. And they took oil barrels and cut them off and tuned them. And now we have all different voices and styles of music that can be played on steel drums. So you're probably most familiar with this, which is a lead pan or a tenor pan, which is kind of the soprano voice. But there's also kind of an alto voice in the seconds. We have these cellos back here, which are kind of a tenor voice. We've got bass pans over there with six cans to cover just a few notes because the notes are so big and low. And those are all descended from like the boom voice. Like the boom voice in tambu bamboo becomes the bass pans. And then the cutters, that type of rhythm, gets found in the comping patterns in some of these instruments. So we see all that just come through in a much more culturally significant way. The first tune that we're going to play is for our smaller steel group called Pacer Pan. This is a student group that we essentially hire out, and they are just a small steel combo. They're going to be playing a rum and coke tune, a style of music called rum and coke, and it's called Baja. That's, like I said, sort of a laid-back style called a rum and coke. I think it speaks to just how popular these instruments are that before tonight, maybe some of you thought that that was Jamaican or sort of pan-Caribbean. It actually comes from the island of Trinidad. But it's so pervasive now among, you know, steel bands on college culture or on college campuses are actually quite common now. Most large universities have a steel band of some variety. So what most people don't know is that steel drum still exists as a competitive culture during Carnival in Trinidad, which is a festival they call Panorama. It's a huge, like, multi-week long Carnival celebration before Lent, kind of like we have Carnival or Mardi Gras here, but they have a huge pan competition. So that group of pan players in the picture, that's one steel band orchestra. Hundreds of people. They're playing a style of music called soca, which is a combination of the words soul and calypso. Calypso being kind of the Caribbean style music that was popular before steel pan, and then soul being what they heard on the radio. So it's going to be a higher energy thing, and this, excuse me, this piece of music is called The Hammer. It existed as a competition piece for Panorama. I gotta play drum set for this one, so let me sneak back here. But without further ado, this is The Hammer. desegregated their country. They gained their independence a lot sooner than a lot of other countries in the Western Hemisphere, even though they had sort of the biggest component of the Atlantic slave trade when it was in existence. So the first style of music that we played at the beginning of the evening was called maracatu, which is from Recife, which is a city in the state of Pernambuco in northeast Brazil. We're now going to play something called samba batucada, which is something you might find in Rio. It's more associated with Carnival, sort of the Brazilian festivities that we're all aware-ish of. If you know anything about Brazilian samba, it's probably a batucada or a samba reggae or something like that. These instruments, if you notice, they're metal. A lot of them are metal. The Brazilians, at least the Rio detachment of them, were able to take advantage of industrialization and industrial techniques in making their instruments in a way that you wouldn't have been if you were in the Caribbean. So we're going to finish with this batucada, and we hope you all have enjoyed the presentation tonight.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday night. All right. All right.
Yeah.
So we've got caixas, which are like snare drums. Paniques, which sound like that. We've got a tambourine. And then these big bass drums called surdos. Nice. All right, here we go. done. We'll see you guys later. Thank you.
If I could just say a quick thing, a quick word on behalf of the Civil Rights Conference. Testing. Okay. On behalf of the Civil Rights Conference, we want to thank each of you for your commitment to continuing the legacy of this great music. As we all know, music is definitely universal, and I feel like I've been on a bumpy train ride. I feel like I've ridden across the Atlantic. You all have taken us on a journey tonight that we are not worthy of. We really appreciate what you all have presented to us today. And I think it wouldn't be, I don't believe it would be inappropriate to give each of you an opportunity to share your name with us. I'd really like to know that. So if you all could just, in any particular order, just share with us your name, we'd really appreciate that. Well, again, thank you all. Let's give them another round of applause. We're extremely, again, blessed and fortunate to have you guys as students at our university. I will shamelessly say I didn't even know you guys existed. But I'm very glad that I was here to be part of this. As we mentioned earlier, we have another few weeks of very outstanding speakers and performances. So we would ask in your continued support that you tell a friend to tell a friend and then have another friend join you. But if we could, again, thank them so very much, and you all have a very good night.